Canoes, Mountains and Caves, we are passionate about journeying, both in the outdoors, on the water, in the mountains or underground, and in life itself. This is our main expedition event from 2019.
As journeys go, the drive from the north of England to the Corran Ferry isn't too bad, especially seeing as it gives access to that special place, that special wild place that's the Ardnamurchan Peninsula. Our plan for Canoe Expedition 2019 was to journey from roughly the Strontian area on Loch Sunart to Loch Allen on the Sound of Mull. You can do this journey two ways. You can go around via the open sea in calm settled weather, a trip that I've not made, or you can cut across through the Morvern Peninsula, and that was our intention for 2019. We arrived and camped at a Sunart campsite just outside Strontian on the Sunday night and had a really sociable evening in the Strontian Inn Hotel. Before the rest of our group arrived, there were 10 of us this year on the Monday morning. That's quite a large group for us, really. As predicted by the weatherman, the day dawned very windy. It was blowing a hoolie with probably in excess of 40-mile-an-hour winds. So we gathered together in Strontian, where we bumped into Colin Skeeth of Canoeing Around Britain fame. That hadn't been planned, but it was really nice to bump into him and talk about our plans for the journey. And he certainly added some useful local knowledge into the equation for us. We set off and did the shuttle, maybe in the hope that the weather would improve while we were moving the vehicles. Those left behind organised boats on the beach, cooked some lunch, and when we got back, the wind hadn't settled at all. If anything, it was a little bit worse. And we waited for the tides for a little while and filled in some time until we were able just to make on that first day a very short crossing in the lee of a headland onto an island just so that we could camp offshore. The camp was a good one, a really pleasant evening, and the Tuesday morning came around with calmer weather. It was by no means a flat calm, but the wind was dropping and improving as we made an open crossing on Loch Sunart and headed off west from our campsite, which had been slightly west of Strontian in the first place, and paddled down the loch in the direction of the island of Carna. As we got out towards Carna, Loch Sunart, it never disappoints. We saw porpoise, lots of bird life, and as we turned into the gem of Loch Tychius, we saw our first seals of the trip and headed on down Loch Tychius to try and find a campsite after what had been quite a long day's paddling, really. The weather hadn't been bad, but we did struggle to find a campsite on Loch Tychius that evening and ended up in a pretty rank and damp place down towards the head of the loch. Some camped in hammocks and under tarps in some heavy vegetation, and a couple of us opted to pitch our tents quite close to the kind of intertidal margins. We made some calculations and saw whether we thought we'd get away without getting wet in the night, and thankfully, as you'll see from the pictures, we measured it just about right and managed to keep dry by maybe 1.5 meters, 2 meters at the most from the high tide mark. Following morning was fine, and we set off down to Kinloch Tychius in the boats. That's the point from which the first portage on this journey starts. Sorry, it's the only portage. It's not a bad portage, this one, but you do need wheels. Initially, it was over seaweed and rocks. It would have been impossible to time the tides perfectly in conjunction with the day needed to complete. So we dragged the boats off through the seaweed and up onto the track and out of Kinloch Tychius. We had wheels for most of the boats. I think we had to carry maybe one or two, and it was quite hard work in the sun, but it's not the worst portage in the world, and it gives way shortly to some of that typical Scottish tussock grass where we could skid the boats down to, forgive my Gaelic again, Loch Ardnamurchan. It was pretty windy on that small Loch Anne as we paddled over it. But if you look really carefully at a map, there's just like almost a ditch that flows out of Loch Ardnamurchan and connects it with Loch Arianus. And we were able to, just using the painters and some wading, move the boats down through this ditch without having to carry them that part of the journey. And we were soon afloat again on Loch Arianus. It was still quite breezy. In fact, if anything, the breeze had picked up during the day. Sunny, but yeah, quite windy. And we were glad to set up camp quite quickly on Loch Arianus. We found a good spot and spent a pleasant evening there. Set off the next day down to the end of Loch Arianus, which again is a beautiful place, flanked by ridges, I think, to the south, and a beautiful sandy beach where it drains into the River Allen. Now, I paddled the River Allen before, and it's not bad with a bit of water in it, but I could see straight away on this year's journey that we would struggle for water. We were able to paddle for a short distance, but it wasn't very long before the lines were out and we moved the boats by a combination of wading, pushing, pulling through the shallows. We stopped late morning, I think it was, and I had a bit of whiskey left. It was Maundy Thursday, so we did a bit of a last supper on the shore before we moved off again down to where the River Allen meets the sea. It is possible, again, to get a good paddle down there at the right level of tide and the river level and just run the rapid down into the sea loch at the end, but that wasn't the case for us this year, and we had to line the quite heavily laden boats down out of the River Allen, under the bridge, and into the sea loch that's Loch Allen. Tides weren't working particularly well for us now, but the weather had really improved, and we had a pleasant paddle down past the bigger ships that were moored in the harbour of Loch Allen to end our journey on a really fine note, in good weather, in good spirits. Everybody did really well. It was a fantastic trip. Some of us stayed on again for another night on Sunart campsite and enjoyed the pleasantries of the Sunart Inn before heading off home again for the final day. Great trip. I'm sure we'll do it again. It's certainly an area that I would very much like to visit again and spend some more time in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.